Hello, everyone. So maybe if, for starters, as always, if anybody is new to the group and wants to, introduce themselves and present what they're doing in this area and what was their interest, now it's a perfect time to do it.
Well, it's not my first time, but I think I didn't introduce myself last time. So I'm Frédéric Desbiens, or Fred. I'm the program manager for Edge Computing and IoT at the Eclipse Foundation.
Hi, Frederick. Good to have you here as well.
Yeah, I think I can go in next now. Hi, everyone. I'm Niket, and I'm a student at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. I'm doing my master's in embedded systems, and right now I'm working on edge computing for IoT for my thesis, where I'll be focusing on developing edge infrastructure for some specific IoT use cases. I got to know about Coop Edge a while ago during my literature review, and this was sort of, I think, the first Node project specifically for IoT. So I'm interested to learn more about it and possibly contribute at some stage later on. Yeah, thank you.
Great.
Okay. So, as I said in the email, I don't have any fixed agenda, so nobody proposed any specific material for this this particular call. So I know we have a couple of things people have been working on lately. So I was thinking maybe we can go through it and see where we are and what are the interests and maybe a little bit organized about where we want to go as the next item. So things on my mind, I know Cindy, you mentioned that you were gonna work something related to the white paper and the Coop Edge. Kilton, your security white paper, and yeah, I think that's the two things I had on the top of my mind. So
Sure, I can give an update on the Coop Edge. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, perfect.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yes.
So, so as you know, Coop Edge right now it's a part of the CNCF sandbox project. We got a couple of sponsors there, and then currently we have 48 contributors from a bunch of people in Huawei and quite some people from external in the community as well. And then from a functionality perspective, besides what we talked last year on the fundamental infrastructure, there are more features added, including the device twin, MQTT, IoT support as well. And then we are adding the device CRD so that customers can deploy or configure their devices on the edge or edge locations. And then recently, I also proposed the edge site design. I can share you guys the design proposal. And last week, I implemented some prototype. So the idea is, like besides running the control plane in the cloud and worker node in the edge, as in the KubeCon, we heard people they're interested to deploy a whole cluster at the edge locations. So the proposal is integrate Kubernetes master with a Coop Edge agent, so that, for example, you can have a K3S server working with a Coop Edge agent, so that you can have a pretty lightweight control plane using Kubernetes on your edge locations. So it's working end to end, and then the code is gonna be merged soon, and I can share all the two links as well. So regarding to the coming KubeCons, there are maintainers Coop Edge talks, including introduction and deep dive. We are gonna do some demos, their demo booth as well. And also Huawei is hosting a meetup, in-person meetup. So you're all welcome to attend. Basically, we want to like welcome the whole community to talk about the edge computing. What are the scenarios? What's the need, challenges, and how we can innovate. People are welcome to present, talk about it, and we can get to know more. So that's pretty much what I have.
Thanks, Cindy. Do you maybe have a proposed date and time for the meetup? Just
we do. I also have the venue as well. I always share in the meeting or the email list. Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just so people can work around that and
yeah, sure.
plan
That
the
makes
schedule. Perfect. Great,
Cool.
great.
And then I'll go ahead and talk a bit about the security paper. So we had planned during the last meeting to start to integrate some of the comments and additions that were being provided by the community. And I have not yet had the time to go in and start to integrate those contributions, but I actually should have the time this week and next. And our plan was to reach a point where, in a very short order actually, where we felt that the paper had received enough contributions and had enough time out there that we were ready to say, okay, it's good. We discussed that possibly being not this meeting, but the next. Any thoughts around sticking with that or extending that? I'm good either way. I definitely think we can finish kind of some comment integration over the next 2 weeks, given the amount of activity on it. But if anyone would like it to be out there longer and doing a bit more, that's also okay too.
No, I mean, I myself haven't taken a look. I'm not looking to, reopen anything. I'd love to take a look. And I think this idea of security, I know I've had a couple recent customer conversations, and since Stephen's on the call, I don't know how well he can speak to the Harbor piece, but where did you land on trusting containers to run on the edge? Is that topic addressed in the paper?
Yeah. So the paper is kind of an exposition of the different challenges that we see at the edge and feel that need to be addressed. And trusting containers is in the mix there, but you are welcome to have a read and see if it's described in the right exact scenario is being described as an edge security challenge, or if you would like to add. So the way that I structured the paper was instead of being a 1-year effort-ish thing where we kind of had to get everything just right and it had its particular vocabulary and so on, it's actually really more of a way of exposing what it is that we need to be looking for regarding security at the edge, and therefore a lot easier to kind of finish out and get out to the world. And so in that regard, I think it's come together quite easily. And it's got a good amount of material in it, but again, it's not a 400-page paper. It's at this point, maybe around a 10, 12 in terms of content. So have a look and see if we've described it the way that you think it needs to be described. But yes, that's in there.
Yeah, and Preston, I heard you mention my name with regard to Harbor. So, where that would fit in, I think that whether it's Harbor or some other private container image registry, when you're at the edge, I would contend that if you have the resources to host it, you probably want something to host your container images locally so that you can take a network outage. But then on top of that, once you get that going, Harbor and I think a few other potential solutions would engage in static analysis of the content in a container to potentially analyze them against CVE databases. So that would be useful. on top of that, if you've got the resources, there might be additional solutions that would do runtime analysis of containers' behaviors. Now, those things can be kind of costly, so whether everyone could afford them in an edge, I'm not so sure. And they often engage in the network underlay as well, because they're monitoring the behavior of these things. An example might be ascertaining whether something that nominally is an inbound only service suddenly appears to be attempting outbound connections.
Mhm.
Harbor wouldn't do that for you, but there might be some other add-ons that would enter into this.
So, I mean, I wasn't planning on this, but it's interesting because, like I said, I've had a couple conversations and I had to put together some slides for an oil and gas customer who had custom devices where they had TPMs on board that were looking to figure out how would they use the TPM to verify, containers, and that led me down a, deep dive into what we're doing in the binary authorization space and where that intersects with open source. So if people want to have a
signing of the images is important, and then the other factor I think that you generally want is audit logs, because a lot of these vulnerabilities get discovered and it turns out they've been in there for months or years, and there's great value potentially in at least being able to get measurements on the worst case potential exposure, like where were they actually used and in what time frame.
Mm-hmm. Would people be interested if I spoke for just 5 or 6 minutes about what I've learned in the binary authorization flow we've set up, and then use that as a point to launch a little discussion around pros and cons or because I'd love to take it as something I've learned about and learn about.
Yeah, that's a big yes for me.
Alternatives that other people know about that I don't know about.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm interested too.
All right, let me do this here. Let's see how I figure this out. There.
Did we finish? I mean, I don't want to hijack the ongoing thing from Kilton, so maybe if he's not finished, maybe we'll let him wrap up. But
I'm enraptured in what Preston's bringing up and presenting. Okay. I am. So I'm happy to transition. The last thing there was just, do we want? We had said we wanted to make the security paper come together a bit quicker than maybe some other papers that have historically stayed out there for a while. And if we're all good with it, I think the deadline of 2 weeks from now, having kind of all comments integrated and have it a little bit more polished is still fine by me. So I'm saying I'm happy to do that unless anyone's opposed.
Ship it.
All right. Ship it.
I mean, the truth is we all accept that we're living in a continuously changing time. So put a timestamp on it. Great. And say this as the world, as understood in the world at this moment, a print time. And then if we want to do another pass on it, I'd say
yeah, we can always update, right? Okay, yep. Excellent. Well, great. So yeah, that's the end of that. So that's the target. Next one of these working group meetings, then we will have a look at the paper with all stuff integrated. That's my target. Great, thanks.
Cool. Perfect. Is this presenting well enough for folks?
Yeah.
I can see it.
Okay. I'm going to just keep it in this mode rather than kind of go full screen. But and I don't want to go through all these. This is the main one I wanted to talk to, which is that they had this challenge, which is they had invested in putting the hardware-based security on the device, and we're looking at that, sort of now what from the rest of the DevOps workflow. And all the blue hexagons are some degree of a managed Google service. And then what I also want to then show is like, what do those functional components look like in open source, right? Because they operate in Saudi or China or places we can't run these services. So, and in general, I'm always in favor of saying, let's avoid lock-in, but try to just offer what we can as far as manage stuff just for its value. So the key steps are this attestation process. And at first I was actually a little bit, not in favor of the approach. I'm still a little bit uncertain about it. And that is, the way it works is that in your build process, you can have multiple steps in the CI/CD pipeline that each can use a separate PGP key to attest to their part being done on an image. And each of them, and this is open source as a project called Grapheus. And so when each of these steps completes their task, they add a note into the sort of metadata server saying this image URI has passed my qualification. And then in GKE, the way it works is there's an admission controller that will not launch a workload until those attestations are verified. And to the user, that integration with the metadata server is pretty seamless. However, this customer wanted to do something just with containers without Kubernetes on the edge, which I think is also kind of a bit of a proxy of just saying, what does this look like in a pure Kubernetes or Kubernetes-like or edge environment? And then, so why this took me some getting used to is that when you look at secure boot or edge security around trusting what content runs, you're usually looking at signatures of the content itself. Whereas in this situation, all that's being attested to is the URI of the registry. And then that means you have to already trust the registry as a service, and that essentially those URIs can't be man in the middle during their production. So the idea is that without the admission controller and without Kubernetes, you'd have one task that pulls. So you'd have to receive some sort of command, which is this, through our IoT service, send a command, say, hey, pull and run this image. You'd pull it. By verifying it, what you're doing is you're retrieving the signature of this URI from this metadata service. Again, this would have to be trusted. You'd have to trust that. But then the public keys of anything that is signing that is attesting to these containers would be stored in the TPM, right? So that's where the hardware trust is applied, in the sense that you're not going to have a malicious process on the device mucking with this verification step. Now, I mean, in order to trust something as rigorous as a TPM, sort of everything around it has to be rigorous. So it's sort of easy, I think, for people to think by putting just something like a hardware secure element on a device that they've solved their whole security model, which is of course false. But in the open source approaches, Grapheus is the thing that manages attestations. Obviously, you can build with any of the stuff. I think the other interesting one that's coming up is this project called Tecton, which I don't know if people have heard of or followed, but it's meant to be a cloud native computing foundation effort around container CI/CD flows. For those who don't know, Vault is a HashiCorp secrets management. So you could, you could replicate this architecture without the Google Cloud managed services, but it still requires on this somewhat interesting idea that you're attesting to only the URI of an image.
Cool.
So I don't know, I tried to keep that quick just because I'm not here to give a long talk about it. But how do other people think about, so the other options that I've come across out there are the Docker tough notary route of signing image content, and then Red Hat. Dayan, I don't know if you know much about the simple image signing project in Red Hat.
Well, what would this solution based on the hardware TPM add in value compared to the Docker notary system?
I think the main thing is that the notion of having multiple facets of your build process create independent and aggregating attestations to a single container.
Well, I thought you could already do that. In other words, I don't believe there's a limit to one signature that you can have. You could have developers sign off on an image and then have a QA department sign on top of that, right?
Yeah, so that's why I'm saying as a discussion point, now this is what I know. I need to kind of compare and contrast with what I know less well. So if you're saying Notary can...
Well, Notary in conjunction, like with Harbor, you can actually use those things to drive policy-based replication. So, you know, this is maybe outside the scope of Edge and into CI/CD, but you could have it drive a process where Dev gets its own image registry. It can live in there for a while as the developers are working on it, have a signature trigger a replication into a QA registry where anything that pops in there is sort of the signal that this is ready for evaluation. They'd sign off, which would trigger a replication to a staging area.
Right. But the difference between that, which is still a pipeline of states, right? Versus a single image in any one of those that is past a list of checks and has, like, does the Notary system support for a given container? How do I retrieve the list of all of the signatures I would expect to be?
Yeah, I believe it does, but I'm speculating. I can't say I've ever done it, but I believe the signatures are cumulative. Another potential issue is just having somebody in your organization vet the licensing terms on components in there. So there are orthogonal things that relate to components that might not have been done by your own organization at all. You know, you don't want the college intern to choose what things come off of Docker Hub, for example. Maybe somebody skilled needs to analyze them from a security perspective and approve them, and somebody else from legal analyzing them from a license.
And that kind of in some ways is where, like, the new world just needs to go copy the old world of golden VM images that have been blessed by an organization's policy requirements, right? Like, start your app image from this blessed corporate maintained golden base image.
Yeah, but it is nice to have, if you can tolerate the storage bloat potentially from these signatures accumulating. And I think in the big picture, in today's world, maybe at Edge, you've got limited enough resources, you'd worry about that. But in most places in traditional IT, you don't. You might as well have that tracking go along for the ride, because when bad things happen, you want to often do forensics to figure out how to make it better next time. Like, hey, this thing supposedly got signed and vetted, but it turned out that maybe it wasn't examined carefully enough. Let's try to improve how we are working this in the future. And having that audit log facility can be of great value. I suppose you could have the signatures accumulate, or you could simply write everything to logs that could be analyzed later. Either one, I suppose, gets you to the same end state potentially.
Steve, on the note of us, you know, being concerned about storage at the edge for all of this, you know, in an ideal world, your edge is not, you know, a single edge node in a constrained network environment talking up to the cloud backend, but rather you have a spread. It's pretty easy to have a localized, you know, gateway that has more storage that can serve as a resource for the really small stuff as well. So I agree with you. I think in extremely constrained environments, you might care, but otherwise I'd say you'd probably rather have this data also. That's based on everything I've heard out in the market. That makes sense to me too.
From a different perspective, I wonder the CI/CD and then attestation of image can be done on the cloud. And then after we deploy to the edge, then we can, on the edge, we can do something.
Absolutely, that was the architecture I was showing. So all of the attestation in the CI/CD and even the storage of those attestations was all in the cloud.
Okay.
And so the verification step was making a cloud-bound call to check in with that metadata service to say, do I have notes that tell me this is trusting? Now, I don't think I think there's a scaling down of the performance cost of doing a full content-based signature. So, you know, when you verify a content-based signature, you've got to read every byte of the image to calculate the signature, right? Which potentially could be raised as like a performance issue if you had to do that for large images. But I think on the edge, you're already trying to ship relatively small images, so that reduces the burden of scanning every byte. This system does have, I think, potentially a irrelevant performance advantage in that since you're only signing the URI, it's, you know, very little content you actually have to like hash and sign and then compare. But
yeah, and then if you're not changing out containers too frequently, then, you know, these steps are executed, and as long as you can protect that what's running has been running, is still running, what was scheduled, then you don't have a lot of changes there, then that activity is not too frequent, the scanning that you're describing.
I don't remember, does anyone remember if the notary approach is integrated with the layered on disk system of image storage? Like, is each layer chunk signed independently so that when you do a differential container pull, the trust
I don't remember. I'm on a Google search now. Let me see if I can continue talking and I'll look it up.
So anyway, I just think as it relates to, and maybe this is a question back to the intent of the white paper. I think it's totally appropriate for the white paper to focus initially on simply enumerating the items you need to solve for without trying to solve all of them, right? It might be interesting to then take the result of that and for each item do an exploration of here are a range of the different ways that the ecosystem has tried to solve this functional problem that we identified in the white paper.
That's what I was hoping would happen.
Yeah. So this sounds like it could be at least one of those areas that has a flurry of approaches. But I outside of Notary, the simple image signing, I'm still not sure that Harbor doesn't actually implement its own.
No, it simply utilizes Notary. So
right.
Harbor didn't reinvent Notary.
So
it simply
Notary, Red Hat, and the Grafeus approaches are the only sort of primary trust establishment systems I know of. But I'd love to make sure if anyone else knows of others that I'm. Because 3 is surmountable if we want to do that as part of a.
Yeah, this sounds like actually a potentially good subject for a whole meeting. The signing subject. So maybe we'll put this on the agenda for a future meeting.
Yeah, it's actually one of the things that's annoying to me that Kubernetes didn't just say Kubernetes as a project is going to have an opinion on this. Because I think the whole way in which, I guess the admission controller was their way of saying, hey, this is a pluggable place we're not going to say there's one.
Well, they didn't have a strong opinion even on the container runtime or on image registries. So it's pretty tough when you're open on all of these other parts of the pipeline to go to a different standard of we're going to take over this aspect.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that this isn't best handled in the registry, or at least you could supplement the registry, but it makes sense that things going in and out of a registry might be a nice point to host this activity.
Just to be clear, like the notary or the checks is to protect the edge node from any like hackers.
It's less about protecting the edge node per se, but it's about protecting the workload.
But
Like, let's say you're using, Coop Edge in a point of sale system in a retail environment, right? And now your application is your point of sale software. So you're less concerned about somebody hijacking your point of sale system than you are somebody hijacking the data it's sending about transactions. Right, you're less worried about the actual physical edge or its local operation necessarily.
okay,
But
I see.
If somebody could compromise your point of sale system, then they could
I see.
really compromise your whole business. Basically.
Not only this, there's a bigger picture issue here that if you establish working technology and really evaluate this, I know I, among others, have been kicking around the idea that when you look at a container image registry, one could argue it's a catalog of blobs, and that if you build such a thing like a harbor, there's no reason you couldn't embellish it going forward to also host things like firmware images, which you're going to find at the edge. They could be firmware images for compute devices, network switches, whatever you might have, even embedded things not running Linux or containers at all, but that still need updates out at the edge location. And signing those firmware images is as important as signing the container images, right? It's all runnable code, and you need to establish provenance and not allow Trojan horse manipulated hacked versions of these to get put into production.
I completely agree with you, Steve, on that. I think the attestation goes well beyond just containers, but the mechanism could be universal. Yeah, completely agree there.
It is interesting though, because this project called Tecton, which is a CI/CD thing, right? They've defined, again, essentially pipelines, right? And pipelines are a pattern that come up in data processing and ETL and orchestration workflows. And there does seem to be, in this tech constantly reinventing itself, a limit to how general a scope certain tools can be built for, in the sense that the attestation of containers, to be pragmatic, has to assume in a few places that we're dealing with building containers. And a fully factored out sort of signing pipeline may be too difficult to apply to specific cases. I don't know, but it's just something I've seen in terms of the limits of patterns that are applicable, but aren't easily portable.
Oh yeah, I think there's the implementation of it is a nightmare, right? To be able to do the checking across different resource types, but there are plugin architectures that could be used, or maybe it's the end goal, which is the attestation verification is universal, right? And then things feed into it. But yeah, point taken. It's just like everything when you get down to just like the edge hardware stuff. The above the abstraction layers, everything seems really nice and well formed, and underneath it's a nightmare of pieces of code that actually do the work because it's different across different boards, etc. So yep, it is true. If it was super easy, I guess we'd have universal attestation in place right now for a variety of things flowing. So yeah.
Bernard, you were maybe trying to say something?
No.
Okay. Your name, your mic picked you up, so your name flashed up. So.
Okay.
Steve, you mentioned the kind of local caching or a mirroring of a registry on-prem, essentially, right? Is that something you've seen people want to do, where you have multiple?
Well, yeah, they're doing it not just for Edge, but even in production IT. I mean, there's reasons for doing it on the Edge, in that you want to maybe operate air-gapped, where you can't get connections back. Maybe it's intermittent. There's people running containers on cruise ships, for example, that only reconnect to the rest of the world when they get to a dock. And they'll run a container image registry on the ship while it's at sea. But even in traditional IT, there's a use case for replicating these image registries just for scale and availability. So you put them behind a load balancer.
Mhm.
So Harbor has this facility for automated replication, and it can be configured to be policy driven as well, so that it doesn't blindly replicate everything everywhere in the world, but based on tagging indicating policy, this can operate completely automated.
So
that could be
Harbor, it can replicate any Docker Hub API compatible private registry?
Right. Now, I don't know what the interop would be if you chose to use a non-Harbor registry as part of this, but certainly the Harbor instances you can push to, let's say, some location in a tree in a Harbor registry, and then from that point, if these images can selectively replicate to other branches of the tree based on policy.
Do you know if Harbor has a pluggable auth system?
By auth system, it has RBAC, if that's what you mean.
Well, more like when you configure the Docker client to send a credential to the registry, right? So just using Docker.
Okay, so when you authenticate to utilize the registry, is
Right.
this what we're talking about? Yeah.
Right.
I believe that authentication is pluggable.
Interesting.
There's a section of the documentation on RBAC. So you can use whatever authentication source is in common use within your organization. So I think there are public cloud vendors who probably use that to plug in whatever creds their public cloud uses.
That's
and
exactly what we do at Google, right? At Google, we use our standard credential for service accounts
right.
plugged into our managed container registry. But what I'm thinking of, this is wandering off topic for the edge, but I might look at doing a Harbor replication of a Google Cloud container registry mirroring for on-prem use, where the primary cloud-based registry is our managed registry, but the on-prem. The other thing I thought of was simply for at least efficiency was just, you could probably stand up any Varnish or similar HTTP cache in front of the cloud-hosted registry. And you wouldn't get the reliability like you mentioned for something like a cruise ship, but if you had multiple nodes all pulling the same container, you'd at least conserve bandwidth on the on many nodes pulling the same image.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think one of the issues or one of the values of that replication is to even constrain your network path so that you don't want a scenario where, let's say I've got data centers that are much larger than others that merit scale out of these registries, because a big city, Los Angeles, might need 5 registries locally, but you don't want all 5 to be pulling them from central. Maybe one should pull it and then share it with peers, something like that. I think there's a lot of flexibility available there.
For us, we use the object blob storage so that like each tenant can pull their images from their own storage. And then we use the common OCI interface or CRI interface for the images.
Yeah. Now, Harbor is configurable to some degree on what's used to store these blobs too.
Mm-hmm.
I think it can go to an external X3, but then the storage isn't local. But the other option is, and people are talking about replacing this because it's not perfect as an object. It's not as perfect as maybe an object store solution, but I think that Harbor for standalone use uses Postgres right now, and people are working on alternate backends for hosting these things. So at least it's modularized to the point where that storage can be replaced, but there's a limited menu of them that come out of the box today. Preston, if you're going to be at KubeCon Europe, I think there is a Harbor pre-event going on there, and a large number of the developers should be present there if you want to, set up one-on-ones to talk about it.
Unfortunately, I'm not going to be there. So.
A lot of the activity is going on in China, so an even better time to engage them would be at KubeCon Shanghai in June.
Personally, I think this is a great topic. We can continue, like relates to the security. As a follow-up action, like we can list out the items and then have some deeper discussions.
Yeah, by the way, as I've been talking, I've been poking around using Google search to figure out if that signing integrates in with the layers. I can't find any indication that it does.
I'd like to make a request that if anybody here on the call surfaces something that is not listed as a particular challenge of security at the edge, and you can even as it gets toward the cloud backends, would you kindly drop a note into the security white paper, even if you just 2-3 sentences that we can expand upon, to contribute this into that paper. That is its purpose, is to, Cindy, you mentioned, so get the list and then dive deep. Would you, if your item in the list is not in the paper, would you please put it in the paper so the paper becomes a master list of these things? That was the point. So just a request.
Anyone else have a topic of interest they want to throw out?
Yeah, no, maybe this time really from my side not. So I started to work towards from the cloud to the edge. And for you guys, my comments are made in green. So if you find the green section, this is done by Bernhard. And I recently reviewed section 6 and 4, and 5 was already quite comprehensive.
Great, thank you very much.
Interestingly, I also came up yesterday with the conclusion we still miss some sort of updates of the host operating system on the edge node or gateway node. So I'm currently, let's say, thinking about how this is related, for example, to the initial setup, which is section 4.2, running processes and binary attestation. Maybe it makes sense to add a dedicated section just for updating of the operating system and delivering some security patches.
Sure, I'd say let's give it a shot. I mean, there's a lot of material there, so we can open a section just for that. And if it turns out to only have 1 or 2 items in it, maybe we merge it into other sections. But I'd say anything more than 3 subpoints, and you've got yourself a whole section there. Makes sense to me.
Okay, fine.
Yeah, looking just at sort of the table of contents and ripping through scanning, I really like the headings of trusting hardware, trusting connected devices. It may be woven in there, but it almost seems like there's the trusting software section.
Yeah, it is kind of woven in there, Preston, but that is essentially where I was going with kind of the build up. If we want to have a conversion of titles to like this section.
Oh no, I'm seeing it now under Edge microservices. The purity of
that type of stuff. Yeah.
I think that's fine.
Exactly. It's kind of baked into the rest of it. Is if you can trust the hardware and also the kind of the orchestration that the right thing's running on the in the right place at the right time, then it's trusting what it is that's running. But feel free to propose relabelings. This is, I really don't have any, I'm not married to any of the stuff that's in there. And I think as a group, it's gotten way better since the first draft got put out for comment.
Yeah, we'll take a look and then comment as needed. Yeah, thanks for the effort.
Sure, I just wanted to put something out there that we could start to drop stuff in on, right? So, and I saw this as the right first step. In discussions of security, I think you go from zero to down the rabbit hole in 2 seconds. Mm-hmm. And because that tends to be the way security discussions go, I thought a master list of what it is everyone's concerned about would be a great way to level set exactly what people need to dive into. Then you essentially have each section or subsection is its own rabbit hole. Well, that's fine. You can take it from there.
So, Cindy, could you, for that event in KubeCon Europe, could you put a link to that in the meeting notes?
Yes, I will. Yeah, in the meeting notes as well as in our email group list.
Okay.
I'll send an invite, just like KubeCon Seattle. We'll create an Excel sheet so that people can sign your name there, and then we can all meet.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then, Preston, I was taking notes while you were talking, so if you want to review those to make sure I got that right.
Yep, looks good.
Preston, I wonder if it's possible we can get the share of your slide deck.
Well,
or you can modify the version.
Potentially, yeah, potentially. I mean, Steven screenshotted the key diagram in the notes, and I'm fine with that. But if you want to, maybe just, I'm happy to PDF parts of it and share it.
Sure, thank you.
Sorry, I went offline for a bit. My internet connection went down. So.
Your edge reliability there, and your intermittent connectivity.
Okay.
Wait, you haven't solved Edge video conferencing with offline mode?
So connectivity and limited resources, I think it's main of my problems.
So another thing that I'll maybe just preview and not launch into here, but I will try to put on the agenda for an upcoming meeting is doing some deeper diving into the KNative Eventing system and how that could be integrated with kind of traditional IoT, like running an MQTT broker on the edge that then has a bridge over to the KNative Eventing system. And it gets very inception-y because I think you can have brokers that link to brokers that link to brokers, and at each stage you can choose how wide the path you want, right? So I think traditional brokers, like you could always do this in Rabbit, for example, where you could have exchanges, and then you could have within exchanges, you could draw like a lasso around these namespaces, or these topics could then bridge.
Well, are you talking about running KNative functions and services out on the edge, or simply?
Yeah, so running, so what I've been doing is taking
to the edge with the
K3S running Knative on the edge, right?
Okay.
And then having a Knative deployed function running in response to a event where the origin of the event is a device on the LAN that's publishing to an MQTT broker on a node or on the cluster, where that MQTT broker is then bridging the event into a Knative event as a Knative event source. Right.
And then for those who aren't that familiar with Knative, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but it implies you're running Kubernetes at the edge.
Yep.
I don't know if that means would you need an entire Kubernetes with control plane or simply some worker nodes?
No, you need the whole enchilada. The biggest advancement recently that, and like I say, I'm happy to kind of talk about this for a whole meeting, maybe I'll put it on the agenda, but the main thing is that it also has had a prerequisite of the full Istio service mesh.
That would actually, you know, coming up, it's not only a meeting is good, but at the very end of the year, we'll have KubeCon North America, where this SIG probably is going to get a, you know, an opportunity to have intro and deep dive sessions again. And that might be a good session for probably in the deep dive category, but I'm really curious about this subject. And then would doing that at the edge make Istio service mesh mandatory as well, or is that only an option?
So recently there's another open source project called Gloo, Gloo, that can be used as an alternate to Istio to fulfill Knative's needs.
But you need one or the other?
You need one or the other.
Okay.
I have a question here. So for device talking to MQTT, then to the Knative, what role Knative is playing here? What if the, yeah.
The main role is that Knative is a approach to standardize the business logic author's contract, right? So if all I'm writing is a function that responds to stuff and I can deploy that function on the cloud or on here, you know, I have to only learn one way to respond to requests or events. And that's the kind of Knative developer contract. And in some ways it's seeking to kind of do some of what Cloud Foundry did for enterprises that wanted to standardize on the layer of technical complexity that their developers had to focus on, right? They had a very standardized way of writing and deploying kind of applications. And so this is basically thinking, how do we bridge these IoT events from sensors and devices into that mode where people might already be investing in.
So instead of developers tackling the MQTT topics, messages, I'm gonna change the gear to Knative events.
Right, it's an adapter.
Yep. Okay, got it, cool.
Yeah, so that way the developer writing that function doesn't have to now learn how to integrate a you know, MQTT client library to subscribe to a topic and then write the handler on that. Just write the handler in a standardized way.
Okay, I see.
And why do we need service mesh here?
I don't think you need service mesh. It's just that the Knative CRDs opted to use some other parts of Istio. So I think that's why it's overly kitchen sinky to throw it all in there. Now I think, you know, there are other interesting things about service meshes on the edge, but those are somewhat orthogonal to the Knative part of it.
I mean, here is then, of course, obviously the gap to cloud robotics, which are extensively using this kind of architecture. And yeah, so this would be a further continuation of this approach in that sense.
And Bernard, what company are you with, or what are you associated with here?
I'm just attending privately, so yeah, I'm not afflicted to any company.
Okay. When you said cloud robotics, I didn't know if there was a particular project you had in mind there.
Yeah, I mean, I know the efforts from Google, but there's also a kind of interesting, let's say, open source project from I think from some Japanese guys. I think they also recently were active in our Slack channel. Yeah, these are the only two initiatives that I know on that topic.
I don't know if you're near Munich, but yeah, that's why I wondered, because I could hear from your accent, maybe you knew something about the German-based project from Google.
Yeah, I'm based in Vienna, not in Munich at that sense.
Okay. Great. I for one am happy to be back, and I think is the schedule now. Where are we at on the process for the scheduling of these meetings?
Well, I think this one is it every 4 weeks at this time, or is it every 2?
4 weeks, right?
4 weeks, okay.
Yeah, so
And then the middle 2 weeks is for the convenience of China and Europe, so it's at an alternate time. So in our time zone, Preston, it occurs late Tuesday evening.
Mhm.
So I'm all open for discussion on this topic and all the suggestions. I mean, we changed it because some people requested it. Then, you know, the APEC meetings were very poorly attended, but it's picking up slowly. So, you know, we might give it a little bit more chance to pick up. But
yeah, let's not change it frequently, because I've still been noticing people try to go in at the old times, and
every time we change
I think
it,
there must be whenever a Kubernetes SIG or working group changes time, it takes a lag of about 6 months till the last person notices the new time.
Yeah, but what I'm thinking, if the APEC time is not convenient for everybody to join, and you know, people think we need, you know, more things even temporarily for a couple of months to work on some topic, we can also schedule new meetings. So maybe we can have like this meeting every 2 weeks in this time on top of the APEC one. So, you know, whatever people think makes sense, you know, to keep the things going properly.
The other thing that we might get an opportunity for coming up, I think we missed a window for Europe and maybe China too, but at the KubeCon events, we can request a birds of a feather like room out of the CNCF. So maybe at the end of the year, if we have enough people likely to go to the North America KubeCon, we can ask for a room and just get together in a physical meeting.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. This year it's gonna be in San Diego, right?
Right.
Yeah. Let's think about that and then put it as an agenda item, right? Then we won't miss it.
Cool. So let me know about the next one. So if you feel like you know, you want to do something in 2 weeks in a, you know, different time set or something like that, you know, we can organize it, or you know, we can all jump on the APEC one and try to do work there for a while.
And just putting a stake in the ground, by the way, for this series, which is for the convenience of North America, I think. I don't think it's fully stated in the group charter for the meeting time, but I'm hoping that this will shift with daylight savings time
Yes.
for the US, because that's the normal expectation in all the other Kubernetes groups.
Yes. So I changed the official time from to the Pacific time zone. So
okay,
you know, let's have one confusion less.
yeah.
Yeah. The hardest job is syncing everybody's calendar. Apparently, it's not.
Okay, I'm going to have to drop because I've got another meeting starting right now. But
Same here. Thanks, everyone.
bye. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, bye. Yeah.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Bye.